So, Mick, the 13th murder that you had to experience in the neighborhood, was that fun, or are you just used to it now?
I mean, after a while, you just go out for the lights, and just might be on TV. Who knows? Who
Right.
knows?
Oh my
Who
God.
knows? Who knows?
That
Here,
took a very
welcome.
dark turn.
There we go. Everyone, welcome to the cold opening by Surge, Coffee Talk with Surge. We're joined today by the ever wonderful and newly haircutted Audra Streetman, the local Baltimore resident Mick Baccio, and myself, Ryan Kovar. We're on Surge here at Splunk, and we are here today to talk about
For
all
your
the
whiteboard
things.
presentation, it looks
My
like you are
whiteboard
gonna.
Yeah, what does that
on
say?
I am on travel. Don't look too deep. There's no hidden messages there. It's all very secretive. I'm in DC today to go talk to some government folks tomorrow. So a little bit of an adventure. For those of you joining us for the first time, we'll try to do about 25 or 30 minutes of hopefully entertaining banter around cybersecurity things and news. We're going to be doing a deep dive today on. What are we doing the deep dive today on? Basically user searches and what that means. Basically how people, the data that you put on the internet, not always as secret as you think. We're going to be doing a deep dive today, a 60-second charity challenge on the CISA solicitation for public feedback on incident reporting with a charity of the Trevor Project, which we'll talk about more then. But why don't we go ahead and Lucky, our lovely producer, why don't we roll news and see what happens?
All right. Well, it was a busy morning for news. I know we all were watching as Peter Zatko, Twitter's former security chief, testified before a Senate committee. This hearing today was after Zatko released a complaint, basically a whistleblower complaint, alleging security concerns at Twitter that were brought up to him by engineers, but he says that the company ignored those issues and also misled the public, he claimed today, due to a lack of understanding and also prioritizing profits over security. So Zatko said that Twitter doesn't know what data it has or where it's stored. He also said employees have too much access to too much data. And another interesting outcome of today's hearing, Zatko said that he was told that there was at least one MSS agent on Twitter's payroll, which is a PRC intelligence service. So I know last time we had an episode, we talked about, the possibility of foreign spies on the payroll. And so this was a new development in those claims. And then also Twitter CEO was not at today's hearing. But the timing is interesting too, because there is that shareholder vote this afternoon for Twitter regarding Elon Musk's takeover deal. So it'll be interesting to see if this testimony in any way impacts that vote. But I'm curious to see what you guys thought.
I'll start off by saying, I knew Mudge when I worked at DARPA. He was a project or program manager of the Cyber Fast Track and a couple other great things. So I did have the privilege of working not directly for him, but tangentially. He is a paragon in our industry. I mean, I don't think anyone who's been around long enough has not seen, Mudge's testimony about BGP and what I think 1997 about I can bring down the internet in 3 days or 3 hours or something, 30 minutes. So he has a huge amount of respect in the community. I will say, I do feel like a lot of the things that were brought to light, sadly, are not that different than a lot of companies. Perhaps the MSS being a notable side point, but it is.
I would say, yeah, that is an outlier. And again, I don't want to, oh, this is all Twitter's fault.
We don't
It's
victim
not
blame.
a victim blaming thing.
Yeah.
It's any business this size. I think one of the things that stuck out for me was only 20% of Twitter's users are in the U.S. And for a company that scope, that size, that global, there are going to be issues. I think the thing earlier about the MSS agent, the Ministry of State Security, that was the first time I had heard that, and that's a bit of a wrinkle because the entire wording around that was if there's it's like a cockroach in the wall. If there's one, there's many. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm just surprised to hear it that openly. I mean, this morning,
I think it was a typo. I think he actually meant to say MSSP, and it was just referring to the. It's
That
could have
letter
cleared this
left
all
off.
up.
It's just
Typos.
it's a smudge. Yeah,
It's just a
yeah.
smudge.
Dave done printing got it wrong.
It was a mudge of the print.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of, well, we're talking about,
Audra just got it.
foreign agents on the payroll. I mean, we talked about this before, but just last month there was a person, I think it was a former Twitter manager, who was convicted in a case where they were accused of spying on behalf of Saudi Arabia. So there is, this precedent of this happening before. So definitely some interesting information that came out today. And I'm curious to see, the lawmakers, members of Congress who are present for this hearing. Cybersecurity is often a bipartisan issue. And so I'm curious to see what the response is going to be like. Well,
I think towards the end of it, there was, hey, bipartisan commission, we're going to create a whole new agency to deal with this and come down with like European-style regulations.
Sure.
We'll see.
I know, it's just fascinating to me. Like, imagine if this was 2 years ago when we had presidential decree via tweet. Like, Twitter, although social media at one point in our country's history for 4 years was a policy methodology for communicating to citizens.
Imagine if we had like a GDPR style regulation that was in place with enforcement. Like, that would be a step. The thing about official statements via Twitter, that goes back to a whole rewrite of 230 or a deep look at it. And I don't think, well, maybe this might lead to that. I do think Section 230 needs to have a good long look at it. And this might spark that.
So for myself,
because to your point,
could you go into Section 230 a bit? It's been a while since I've blown off the parliamentarian congressional records off my desk.
So basically, our online content providers responsible for what is on their systems and who gets to decide what that is. And if, to your point, if you're going to say that the White House tweets are official statements because that's often the first time where you see these things.
Sure.
I think that kind of invokes a different look at what's who's responsible for that.
Sure.
And then becomes federal regulated. It's a whole big thing, and it's a nightmare no one wants to deal with. But I think at some point we're going to have to. And to be honest, if this sparks that'd be super.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I don't think really came up much in the questioning, because I was flying today, so I didn't have a chance to read or watch every part of it. But there was certainly a lot of confusion just around. There wasn't CISO at the time at Twitter. There was, Mudge was brought in as a chief or a security leader. There was a CISO. There were also other engineering security leaders. And if we take the word Twitter away, I think it's interesting. I can once again say I feel like I've seen this in just about every Fortune 100 company. Like the amount of people who have the
hired
word
for their name.
Yeah, like the word CISO. Like sometimes there is a CISO, but a lot of times there's the CISOs. Like a CISO of CISOs is almost needed sometimes. I'm curious. I don't think Twitter is that big of a company by people, but certainly by influence and revenue or possible revenue. Interesting. It's just a fascinating case study.
And the day is not over yet. I think this afternoon there's also a long day for Twitter ahead.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that is that a judge ruled that Musk can actually amend his lawsuit against Twitter to include Zatko's claims. And then I think he was also subpoenaed by Musk's attorneys. So these two stories definitely intersect. It's going to be interesting to see what that vote is later today.
Wow. Fascinating. What else do we have, Audra?
So Albania, which is a member of NATO, actually cut diplomatic ties with Iran following a cyber attack in July. And this one actually shut down government websites and services for a time. And then on Saturday, that there was a second reported cyber attack in Albania targeting one of its border systems. And officials in Albania say that attack originated from the same source. And the U.S. has also attributed this attack to the Iranian government. The National Security Council, they put out a statement condemning this. And I believe there are also sanctions on Iran's intelligence agency in response to this. So this is, kind of unprecedented in the way that it's, the first time that we've seen sanctions and, cutting diplomatic ties over a cyber attack. I mean, can you guys recall any other, situation like this?
Publicly?
Publicly?
No. Definitely not.
Publicly. I guess everything I'm asking is publicly.
Yeah, please
Like,
not.
What? What's the third worst thing can happen? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Don't sue me, anybody. Jeez. I think we have heard for the past how long, oh, the cyber war is coming. This is actually it. Like, this is all of the things that every journalistic outlet has saying, oh my God, this is potentially could happen. This is happening right now, and it's in Albania. And I think the Iranian response of, oh my God, no, this is just IPs. They come from anywhere. What are you talking about? It's not us. That's what expected. The sanctions, I think, aren't new. I think they're rebuking just so strongly. I'm just curious if other NATO nations join in on that, and if there's any group response towards Iran.
I'm fascinated by this because everyone thought that this was what was going to happen in Ukraine during the Russian
and here
and here, and here. And it's just, there's a fascinating article that was put out this weekend or on Friday, and it was talking about. I thought it was a cyber article. It was talking about the disruption of power grids, and one of the things they were talking about was the ability for Ukraine to possibly buy Alibaba-style drones and put light wires across them, and then just fly them across the substations of Russia from hundreds of miles away with autonomous vehicles, and how much more effective that was than a cyber attack. Which just kind of, brought my own bias is if right now when I hear industrial control, if I hear attacks on the power system, I think like, oh my God, like it's going to be cyber. Or you go ahead and spend $2,000 or $3,000 for a drone, put on some long wires and just send it one direction. Hopefully Harry Styles is not involved. But the Albanian thing is like the actual, to your point, this is the, what we're doing. And they're not necessarily next to each other. There's reasons for this to happen. The Adriatic I think Albania joined NATO in 2004 or something like that with the Adriatic Charter. There were a couple that kind of went in there.
What's also, to me, I think I read the same article, the interesting tack for me was cyber is not the dominant force that we thought it was going to be used broadly.
Yeah.
Right? To your point, ease of use. Yeah, I can just order something and it's in the mail and I got it, in a week or two, as opposed to a cyber attack where there is a lot of legwork, a lot of reconnaissance involved. Just the usability, I guess, of just that, low tech work. It's high low tech. I think it was in Giant Mnemonic. I think it's just a refresher, right?
It's a new domain of warfare, but we haven't seen it effectively used or as effectively used as it could be. I think Nicole Perloff, in her book that she wrote, one of the things that I really did like about the book specifically was it talked about how the U.S. had has one of, we don't talk about it with a Teddy Roosevelt methodology, walk softly, carry a big stick. Like, I have no inside knowledge, I have no knowledge, but I personally believe we probably have an incredible offensive cyber capability, but we don't tend to use it. Or if we were using it, no one's catching it that much.
I don't know. If you look on LinkedIn, I think there are tons of folks that have TAO, and they'll tell you all about it, I think.
It's not just a nightclub, people. But the part of the reasoning that she put forth, and I thought was an interesting approach, was part of the reason we don't use it is we're very vulnerable to those sort of attacks internally as well. And when you're looking at countries whose electrical grid and infrastructure was built, we had the first electrical grid, or one of the first. We have things that were some of the first connected to computers. So some of these things are 40 or 50 years old now. Some of the countries that had just got this installed in the last 20 years or 10 years, are they going to be more at risk? Are they less at risk? Does this change it? Like, why use cyber attacks against Albania versus other countries? Like, what's the... I can't wait to read about this in the history books. Hopefully we're around long enough.
So you're telling me that there are places that would prioritize offensive cyber capability instead of basic cyber hygiene and defenses, and that might come around and bite them in the long term?
Yeah, a friend of mine used an analogy, cyber vegetables. This is kind of like, I'm going to keep running marathons, but still eat crap food.
Wow. I can't believe the leopards would eat my face.
I can't believe you voted for them 3 years in a row.
All right, moving on. So we have a bunch of ransomware stories per usual.
Shock.
Shocking. So CISA actually put out alert here about Vice Society. And this is a ransomware group that's known for double extortion, where they'll steal data and then also threaten to leak it if the ransom isn't paid. And this group, now this isn't in this alert, but Vice Society, the group itself, has claimed responsibility for a ransomware attack on the Los Angeles Unified School District. And this is the second largest US school district. It has more than 640,000 students. And district officials haven't commented on who's responsible. But this advisory came out around the same time as this attack, warning that Vice Society is disproportionately targeting the US education sector. So, you know, it's an interesting development, something to keep an eye out for, especially when you're talking about, you know, the largest school districts in the nation. That can impact, you know, quite a few people who are already struggling, you know, with hybrid learning and returning to school and COVID. So when you add this on top of it, I imagine it can get messy for an entire district to try to address this.
And some of those kids would be really upset if they could read. It'd be.
And you know, it's just I feel bad for them, and I imagine one day like this time capsule will come and they can go in. Yeah, like it's horrible. It's probably some 15-year-old. No, want to do my homework. The advisory that they put out is fantastic. It's really good work. There's a couple articles out as well. The thing for me is targeting the education sector. It seems like a low barrier to entry, and it's not to disparage the education sector. Like, you get what money allows you to buy, and they don't have the resources to afford fantastic security. So this is kind of like punching down.
But it's also an area that people prioritize, you know, everyone agrees that education should be a priority. So if you're targeting them, it's going to be something that theoretically is financially rewarding. Like, is this a sweet spot of people are going to pay a ransom, but the U.S. government isn't going to put you on the top 10 list because you didn't interrupt our gas?
That's true. That's true.
Right. Children's futures less important than gas stations. That's heard it here first with Mick Baccio.
All right, as long as, you know, we don't cancel football games on the weekends, we can't have that. So
we're fine.
So another story I saw that I wanted to mention is, I believe this was Bleeping Computer. Yes, Bleeping Computer. They put out this story about a new encryption tactic that ransomware gangs are starting to employ. This is called intermittent encryption. And this was actually outlined in our research with Surge. Shannon Davis did research about ransomware encryption speeds. He noticed that Lockbit, PwnLocker were among the fastest binaries in terms of encryption speed. And those binaries employed this tactic where they would only encrypt certain portions of a file. So it was equally as effective. You would still need a key to decrypt it, and the file was, you know, rendered useless once it's encrypted, but it was faster because it only encrypted, you know, portions of the file. And so there's different kinds. This article outlines some of them. You can choose how many bytes to encrypt, like the ransomware operator can choose. Others determine how many bytes to skip based on the size of the file. So, you know, it's interesting to see this as a more common tactic so that they can be faster and then evade detection.
Yeah, I was really proud to see they actually referenced Shannon's work. It's hyperlinked to inside the blog. I can't imagine that more ransomware operators aren't going to move to this technique. It is much faster.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, Shannon and I and Marcus are going to be giving talks in Australia, and then we'll talk about it later. But, you know, we're giving talks on a ransomware derby. So Shannon's actually going to be throwing these newest variants into his testing harness and actually see how they compare against Lockbit 1, 2, and 3 as well. So we're excited to see kind of how they do in these improvements. It was interesting. The Bleeping Computer article linked to the actual primary research, and it kind of went into something that Shannon and I noticed, which was a lot of these ransomware binaries have undocumented options. So basically, you can execute them in different ways. And unless you do a lot of reversing, you're not necessarily going to be able to find it. Or you pay for basically the Haynes manual for your ransomware, which, you know, you have to be probably 40 and above to get the Haynes manual for car repair reference. But If you do, that's a good one. But the point is, a lot of these things are undocumented.
Nobody does.
Audra did not. You did, although you may not.
I did. I didn't want to say anything, Grandpa. You'd forget it by now. But yeah, I think the encryption methodology is not really new. I don't think we've seen this for a while. I think it's becoming more common because, to your point, it's faster and it works. It's like if I have a burger and I offer you a bite, or you just take a bite, but your bite's in the middle, well, that whole burger is useless. So I don't have to encrypt the whole file.
Who do you hang out with?
You know the people I hang out with. You know who that is. So
I don't know who that is.
I don't want it. I don't even think about it. Now I'm judging everyone. This is horrible.
Anyway.
That's fair. So the technique is not novel, but I think it's becoming more, commonly used by folks because it's a faster technique. And I'm curious to see the results from Shannon's ransomware derby coming up. But I think we'll see more of this, and yep. I don't know if it makes the decryption any easier.
It's something we always wanted to hit on in our encryption or in our research was the decryption speed. But fun fact, to get the decryption speed, you have to pay for ransom. And there's this whole paying sheltered states terrorist thingy that we didn't want to get into. But I mean, just
you didn't want to get into. I knew a guy.
You know a guy, yeah. He eats his. Yeah, we know this guy. He eats his hamburger from the middle out. I don't want to associate with those type of people.
Or even measuring the accuracy or success of decryption, right? Because
that's the other part.
There's no guarantee you're going to get all your data back. That would be an interesting study if someone has that data set.
There's been a lot of anecdotal stuff. There was, I believe, linked off that bleeping computer. Somebody talked about one of the companies paid for it, the decryption, and they only got 6% of their files back.
Right.
We've talked about this before. One of the other issues, of course, is even if it works, it could take weeks. The ransomware gang is incentivized to make good ransomware that encrypts, not good ransomware that decrypts. And then even if it does decrypt, in modern day networks, if they did their job right, no one turns off whole networks and brings them back on. So you have no idea how this is going to work, the order of operations. We saw this with a lot of hospitals, which have very specific type, like New Zealand, I believe 2 years ago was the biggest version of that. They paid for the decryption. The decryption worked, but they were still out of business for 6 weeks as they brought things up and found out oh, this is a cluster and you have to have this cluster up before that cluster. And this piece of delicate medical equipment requires connecting outbound to this server. Yeah. Anyway, ransomware not going away.
Yeah, it is. All right, last story here. Lockbit said it would pay anyone $1,000 if they tattooed the Lockbit logo on themselves. So
Mick, how many times do you have this done, Mick?
So I didn't say there was a limit on it, but I don't know if you get paid or get paid in Bitcoin. So that's maybe we could do that instead of paying for a decryption key. Just, hey, we'll get a tattoo.
Katie
can get it next to her.
That's just.
Katie can get it next to her Surge tattoo. So
yeah, well, she's in the office somewhere. I'll see if she can come by and show her Surge tattoo. Real dedication to the team.
Last week we saw government leaks reformatted as an NFT, and this week we're seeing ransomware logos as tattoos. It's just, you never know. Every week it's something new.
Maybe a little.
I think that's an amazing.
I love that. I love that comment. I'm thinking, next DEF CON, who's with me for a henna Lockbit booth?
So, do I have to pay for the ink to come off?
Yeah.
Like a 40% chance it works. Takes 5 weeks.
6 weeks. Yeah, or
hear me out.
Chance of having it scrubbed off by the end of the day. I love that comment. LinkedIn user 37. Thank you. Great input there. I believe that is it for our news roundup. Lucky, can we get some charity challenge excitement so I can go ahead and start preparing to pay?
Or is there?
We have our events.
No upcoming?
Oh, we have events. I'm out of order. I am out of order.
You're
out. That's why I know it's your show. It's your show. We're just here.
That's true. Damn it.
Okay, so events coming up. We have a few things worth mentioning. September 27th, America's Bots Day. Tom Smith has been working very hard to organize this. You can register for free online, bots.splunk.com. And this is happening 9 a.m. Pacific. It is a free blue team capture the flag event. So if you've never competed in bots, this is a great opportunity to do so. Mick is speaking at a United Nations conference in Valencia, Spain, coming up October 4th, which is super exciting. And then Ryan, you and Shannon are presenting that ransomware research we talked about at a digital crimes consortium in Vancouver. So lots of events coming up. And I think now we can run the 60-second challenge clip.
Don't fire me, Audra. And now, Splunk Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject of today's charity of choice. Good luck.
All right. Had some technical difficulties. You never know what you're going to get.
I mean, the good news is if I screw up the charity challenge, then it's because I'm going through a tunnel.
I didn't see any problems. That's exactly what you sound like.
That's exactly.
You sound like a transformer.
Well, there is more than meets the eye. That is 100% true.
No one's gonna get that reference.
No, sadly. Great. Mick, as the 4-time in a row victor, I'm literally just getting ready to pay now. So, who goes first?
What are we talking about?
Let me give the prompt. So we have CISA is requesting public feedback about cyber incident reporting rules, and this was after a bill was signed into law in March that CISA has to comply with by creating these rules. So people have until November 14th to weigh in on potential policies, terminology, all of that for these rules. So I wanted to ask both of you what you think CISA should consider when drafting these incident reporting rules. So who wants to go first?
I would like to say that doing this on a laptop screen versus my normal 40-inch monitor with all the things up has really messed up my flow. So we'll start there. But Mick,
your Feng Shou, as you may call it. You're just yes.
There you go.
Well, as the 19-time victor, I think you should go first.
Great. Really appreciate that, Mick. All right. Hold on 1 second, Lucky. Let me get up my absolute lack of preparation here. Okay. Let's go ahead and roll. So, incident reporting for CISA to the U.S. government has been something that's come up quite a bit over the last 20 years. And we've seen a lot of attempts go through. We've seen legislator go through. We've seen the recent the TSA directive actually had this in the first draft, and then they actually had to bring that back and say, never mind, don't report within these specific timelines. The biggest issue that I've always run into in my career when dealing with any sort of incident reporting guidelines is what defines an incident. Now, a lot of organizations have this written down, but unless the federal government enshrines in law exactly what defines an incident, it turns into a lot of almost Roe versus Wade sort of debate around when does it start. Because does the incident start when the incident handler first sees a alert? Does it start when they tell their CISO? Does it start when the CISO tells the board? So if I have one piece of advice for CISA as they start trying to draft this legislation, is pay careful attention to actually what defines an incident, when it starts, and when that timer begins. Otherwise, it will fail.
Great. All right, Mick. What do you have?
Okay. Ready? All right. So my feedback, I dig your approach, and please keep doing this. It's going to take longer because you're doing with a little technique I've learned called the right way, listening. Here's why. The listening sessions, which is a pretty new approach as far as I know. New York, Atlanta, Seattle, Dallas, and a bunch of other cities. There's 11 total across the United States where instead of getting trolled by Drake's new album, this listening session, Director Easterly gets to hear your hottest bars about the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2022. Which, come on, it's easy. It's rhyme with two. So reading legislation, we all know the devil's in the details, so it's time to put pen to pad and define covered cyber incident or substantial cyber incident. Dylon, it's your chance to spit the hot fire about what reasonable belief that a covered cyber incident has occurred means. So register, these events are going to sell out. It's your chance to be heard by CISA and the rest of the gang about all those terms, what they mean in the legislation, in the reporting before it becomes final.
If I understood half the jokes you told, I would have been very impressed.
I was following along.
Oh,
Thank you.
Of course you were.
I didn't get Ryan's handbook reference, but I did get
You gotta know your audience, Ryan, right?
I know the audience.
Does anyone have an opinion? Anyone watching?
Yeah.
Who do you think won?
Yeah,
Because
throw in some
I think I
commentary.
won. Yeah, I think
this is a tough one. I really like Ryan focusing on what defines an incident, but I think you both kind of touched on that a bit. I think it's really defining what counts as what, creating terminology, like you said, and defining it. I think a lot of that's lacking with incidents.
But through the 11 listening sessions that are being hosted,
You don't get
that's
extra
what
time.
they're doing.
So
I'm just I'm selling my point. I really just maybe
Don't
the
oversell
audio
it.
was garbled. It didn't come through clearly. I had some marbles. In any case.
Okay, well, so I guess I have to decide then.
We're not getting any
Lucky.
input from the audience. Lucky, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, Lucky,
You
what
want
do
to do
you
a
think?
voice of God over? He's like, crap, they want me to go off a mute? Never mind. I don't know.
Okay, I'm just going to make an executive decision. Ryan, you win this week. Sorry, Mick.
Boom.
Ooh.
I'm never preparing again. There we go.
Oh,
That's it.
No, that doesn't.
Next time.
There we go. All right, Mick, before we close out, you're going to have to donate to Trevor Project. Show it proudly. No, that was not the 6th win in a row for Mick. Ryan won. What happened? Number 1. All right.
So September is National Suicide Prevention Month, and that's why we chose the charity this week, which is the Trevor Project, which helps provide crisis intervention for LGBTQ plus youth. So just some background there on the charity this week. But yeah, let's roll the deep dive clip.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite. I have more fun doing that than any other part of my job. It's important.
Video editing, it's your passion.
That's my passion. Yeah.
It's your passion.
So Audra,
so
what are we deep diving on today?
So I think we've been on a theme the last several weeks about data privacy, and we're going to continue with that today because it's a very relevant topic right now. So this is an article from Bleeping Computer again, some research, I believe, from Norton Labs, and they're reporting that more than 80% of top websites leak user searches to advertisers. So this is third-party data. So security researchers, they created a crawler that could bypass interstitials, kind of like those prompts that prove you're a human, so that they could actually enter search input on each site. And they entered the term jelly beans in all caps. So this way they could analyze the HTTP network request to see if that word appeared in any request to third-party partners. And this is how they measured the user searches leaked to third parties. So very interesting, and I don't know what you guys think about what control do people have over, third-party data.
I'll say everyone has always talked about the generations that came, as an elder millennial. Sorry, Mick, and your young Gen X, but as a
Gen X.
elderly millennial here. One of the things I've often heard is how social media is going to haunt people's political future. And, I was lucky enough to be just old enough to miss by basically just a year or two all the social media trends that kind of went through. But what I don't think people realize, or what's always going to be fascinating to me, is what would happen if one of these search engines is breached and someone has all their search queries released publicly. Or if these sort of third-party tools are collecting all of that and the search engine isn't holding them, but the third party, which is getting telemetry and metadata, which you can infer what someone is searching on, is leaked. I mean, those are the things that I think are going to change the world someday in ways that people don't understand. For those of you watching, for me, it's basically searching up things that inevitably WebMD tells me I had cancer for. So that's 90% of everything I Google is just around what ailment I have and how I'm dying from cancer. So.
Well, wasn't there some research done that also said, even if you don't hit enter, just that buffer of what you typed into the search bar, that's still captured. So, don't use a website?
Well, I think first and foremost, you want to, some browsers have options to do not track. So it's not completely effective, but it's an option, right? You can clear your cookies if you have a cookie alert that pops up as part of that EU law. You can actually click on it to disable all but the necessary cookies. And then the other thing too that not a lot of people think about, because you think about like HTTP cookies, right, as third-party tracking, like for advertisers, but there's also LSOs, like local shared objects, which are like Flash cookies. So like Adobe Flash would store this, and it can actually be used across browsers. So if I search for a product like on Amazon on, Chrome, and then I switch to Firefox and open up a new search, that LSO is shared between browsers, which is even more interesting that I don't think people realize that.
There's a segment on Risky Business this week, or last week, I guess, where they talked about plugins and add-ons, and like there's all these great add-ons, and of course everyone got really upset when Google Chrome said, oh, by the way, we're not going to provide support for ad blockers. And I thought it was interesting, and I love Risky Business, and Patrick and Adam do a great job every time. But one of the things that I've thought about before, but Adam pointed out, he actually runs 0 add-ins for any browser he runs, because his point is that I can't trust any of these plugins because they're run by, like, even the most beneficial one could be run by 4 guys. And if someone came up to them and said, hey, here's 20,000, 50,000, here's 20 Bitcoin, we just want you to do this one import, like, there's 0 chance of that getting caught, right? And you want to talk about supply chain. It was just an interesting area that I don't think a lot of people have talked about, even for vetted add-ons, like just how much they now interact with your browser. And when our entire life is now increasingly geared towards browser. I mean, we're doing this show on a in-browser restreaming platform, right? Like just everything is browser-based in some way or the other. So it's a fascinating aspect that I haven't thought about as much.
I think that and as well, I learned really, really young. It was, if the service is free, you are the product. So everything you do, if it can be monetized, it will, unless someone says no, right? Because that's pretty much how capitalism works, from my understanding, is all the things we're doing online, someone's going to make money off it because that's how they support the service itself. All the browsers we use, to your point, my right next to a browser, my second favorite thing is an ad blocker for that browser. And how does that ad blocker work? It's not just someone's goodwill that, gets that ad blocker supported and constantly plugged in. And to your other point, all of my traffic now goes routed through that ad blocker. So if that's compromised one way or the other.
Well, if we take this a little bit of a different angle and kind of go back to the blue team that we talked about, I have personally pivoted often and very successfully off of adversaries' cookies and adversaries' fingerprinting off their web browser. And I mean, one of the questions we always get is around, or we've had a lot of questions historically around user agent strings and the value or lack of value on them. And by themselves, user agent strings are horrible for the most part indicator of compromise. But they are a very interesting indicator when you watch one IP address switch between user agent strings. Or if there's an accidentally misspelled user agent string that you start seeing in different IPs from the same ASN. Like, there's all this information that we see adversaries leak that I wouldn't necessarily make a SIM rule for, but if I'm pivoting and hunting, become very interesting. And there's one thing I've learned in the last year and a half, and I think everyone on this call would agree, the level that marketing and threat intelligence are almost the same career. Like marketing, how they do data analytics for marketing and how I do cybersecurity intelligence, like threat intelligence, there is so much overlap there. It's at a different angle, but the tools and the data are very similar. So it is fascinating to kind of watch this, to your point, Mick, about the monetization of what we do on the internet versus what we do to pivot and hunt adversaries.
And to your point, though, about ad blockers and extensions for your browser, I still think it's worth it to do that, though, because I just remembered the one that I use. It does sell your data, but you can opt out. They have that option, so I do think that's.
Do they lease it though?
Yeah, good question. But I still think it's better. I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you could also, if you use a VPN, that can make it harder for third parties to track because your location data
also makes you stick out more as well.
And that's the other side of it.
Well, if everyone uses a VPN, no. And then what about incognito browsers? With that,
as many of the users on the website, or as a former sysadmin, I can tell you, people do not fully understand what incognito does or does not do.
In terms of clearing cookies when you exit out.
I use it quite a bit. I mean, for things, but really specifically around like travel is fascinating to watch, like differences in prices for travel. It's a good way when you're having a browser issue to try it with incognito to see if you do have a cookie. Like I think those do work really well. We saw some other people put up Tor browsing in the comments. I would, Sharon DeGrippo is going to hate me for this, but you have to be careful with Tor browsers, especially in today's modern network, because the people who operate the exit nodes for the Tor operators are not the people that you necessarily think they are. And there was a study done years ago about the number of Tor exit nodes that were actually from different governments operated. If you get enough telemetry, you can figure anything out. So there's advantages there. There's disadvantages. To Mick's point, VPNs are good, but they also make you pop up. Trying to hide is trying to hide. That's why I use Lynx personally. James Brodsky, if you're watching, he taught me how to use Lynx as a web browser. Audra will go over it later. I think you'll like it. It's very text heavy. But you actually probably know about this from your Linux Plus cert. There you go.
Yeah, I've never used it.
I use dead drops. It takes a while, but or encyclopedias. That's how I get my information still. It's
There we go. Well, we are way over. So let's go ahead and call it. As always, a pleasure. I will be out of the office traveling in 2 weeks. So we're going to have a to-be-announced guest Kovar for the next coffee talk. But we will be back in 2 weeks on Tuesday to do more exciting things. As always, phenomenal. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And if the team would just join me in an awkward staring at the camera until Lucky rolls credits, we will fairly, wish you all adieu and farewell.
I won.
You did not win.